The morning began like many others in the small, dusty town where life moved slowly, and people knew each other by face, even if they did not know each other by story. The sun rose gently over open fields and narrow roads, and the air carried the smell of soil and fuel mixed together. An Apache vehicle waited near a bend in the road, its paint faded from years of work and weather. The driver sat quietly behind the wheel, stretching his hands and watching the road ahead. He had driven this route for many years, and nothing about the day felt special or different. He believed it would be another ordinary trip, carrying people from one place to another without memory or meaning. His mind was focused on small things like the sound of the engine and the way the steering felt under his palms. He did not know that before the journey ended, his thoughts would change in ways he had never expected. Not far from the roadside, a woman stood alone, waiting. She held a small bag close to her side and kept shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Her face showed tiredness that went deeper than lack of sleep. It was the kind of tiredness that came from carrying too much inside for too long. She looked down the road again and again, hoping the vehicle would arrive soon. People passed by her without noticing much. Some were busy with their own lives, and some simply did not care. She had learned long ago that pain often lived quietly inside people, and the world rarely stopped to ask about it. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Her body felt heavy and her chest felt tight, but she told herself she had no choice except to move forward. When the Apache finally came into view, she felt a small sense of relief. She stepped forward slowly as it stopped near her. The driver glanced at her through the mirror and nodded without speaking. She climbed in and found a seat near the middle of the vehicle. Keeping her bag on her lap, she avoided eye contact with others and stared out the window. Instead, inside the Apache, there were a few passengers already seated. Some looked half asleep and some stared at their phones while others watched the road. Silently, the mood was quiet and normal. Nothing suggested that anything unusual would happen. The driver pulled back onto the road, and the vehicle began to move again. As the Apache rolled forward, the woman tried to settle herself. Her body ached in ways she did not fully understand. She shifted in her seat, adjusting her position, hoping it would help. She pressed her lips together and focused on her breathing. She did not want attention. She did not want questions. She only wanted to reach her destination and disappear back into her life. The road was uneven with small bumps that caused the vehicle to shake slightly. Each movement sent a sharp reminder through her body. She held her bag tighter and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories of recent days filled her mind, memories of long nights restless thoughts and moments when she felt completely alone. Even among people, she felt unseen. The driver remained focused on the road. He had driven through worse roads and harsher weather than this. To him, the bumps were nothing more than part of the job. He adjusted his speed slightly and continued forward, unaware of the silent struggle happening just a few seats behind him outside. The window fields stretched out with patches of dry land and scattered trees. The sky was clear and bright, but inside, the Apache emotions were far more complex than the peaceful scene outside. The woman opened her eyes again and looked at her reflection faintly visible in the glass. She barely recognized the person staring back. She remembered a time when she felt stronger, when her voice was confident and her steps were firm. Life had slowly worn her down through responsibilities, disappointments and losses that no one else seemed to notice. She had learned to keep going even when every part of her wanted to stop. A sudden bump in the road caused the Apache to jerk more sharply than before. The woman gasped softly and leaned forward, gripping the seat in front of her. Pain shot through her, unexpectedly intense and overwhelming. She froze for a moment. Trying to control her reaction, her heart began to race, and her breathing grew shallow. She told herself to stay quiet, to stay calm. But the pain did not listen. It spread quickly and caught her off guard. She felt trapped inside her own body, unable to escape the sensation. She tried to press her lips together again, but a sound escaped her throat before she could stop it. The sound was not loud yet, but it carried emotion, fear, shock, and hurt, all mixed together. It broke the calm inside the Apache. Like a sudden crack in glass, several passengers lifted their heads and turned to look.
Ow.
The driver glanced into the mirror, confused by what he heard. Woman felt every eye on her, and her face grew hot with embarrassment. She lowered her head and wished she could disappear. She wanted to explain, but words felt heavy and slow in her mouth. She focused on breathing again, hoping the moment would pass quickly. Apache continued moving, but the atmosphere had changed. The silence now felt tense and uncomfortable. The driver tightened his grip on the steering wheel, unsure if he should stop or keep going. He did not want trouble, and he did not want to embarrass anyone, including himself. Passengers exchanged quiet looks. Some were curious and some were annoyed. A few felt concern, but did not know how to show it. The woman sat still, afraid that any movement would bring the pain back. She kept her eyes down and her shoulders tense. The driver slowed the vehicle slightly, listening for any further sound. He felt a strange mix of responsibility and discomfort. He wondered if he had done something wrong, or if the road conditions were to blame. He did not want attention drawn to him or his driving. The woman swallowed hard and adjusted her bag again. Her hands trembled slightly. She told herself she would be fine. She had endured worse than this in silence before. She only needed to hold on a little longer as the Apache moved deeper along the road. The tension lingered like an unspoken question. No one spoke, and no one laughed. The ordinary journey had shifted into something uncertain and fragile. The driver kept his eyes forward, and the woman kept her pain hidden as best she could. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning of a moment that would soon force truth, emotion, and understanding into the open. For now, the road stretched ahead, and the Apache carried its passengers forward, holding more than just people inside it. It carried stories, pain, and lessons waiting to unfold. The Apache moved steadily along the winding road, and the woman tried to focus on the scenery outside, but her mind kept returning to the sudden pain she had felt earlier. She pressed her bag against her chest and tried to breathe slowly, but each movement seemed to bring a small jolt through her body. She wanted to explain what had happened, but the words felt heavy and embarrassing. She could feel the eyes of the driver and the other passengers on her, even though no one said anything. The silence pressed down on her like a weight she could not move. The driver kept his eyes on the road, but he could not ignore the tension that had entered the vehicle. His hands gripped the wheel a little tighter, and his mind raced through possibilities of what he should do. He was trained to stay calm and continue driving, yet his thoughts kept drifting to the woman and her expression. He wondered if she was all right, if she needed help, or if she would feel better if the journey ended sooner. He did not speak because he did not know what words could fix the feeling in the vehicle. Other passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Some pretended to look outside, and some tried to focus on their phones, but their attention was divided. They whispered quietly to each other in low voices, unsure if they should interfere or give the woman space. Their curiosity mixed with unease, and each second seemed to stretch longer than it should have. The woman closed her eyes again and remembered the moment when the pain had first come. She had been walking through the narrow streets earlier in the morning, carrying her bag and thinking of the tasks ahead. She had felt a small tightness in her chest and thought it was just fatigue, but it had grown sharper as the day continued. She had told herself to keep going, and now she realized how easily life could surprise a person with discomfort at any momenta. Bump in the road caused the Apache to lurch slightly, and the woman let out the soft sound of discomfort again. She quickly covered her mouth and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment as she tried to control her body and her reaction. Her hands gripped the edges of her bag, and she could feel her heartbeat quicken. With each passing second, the driver noticed the movement and glanced at the rearview mirror. His eyebrows knit together, and he slowed the vehicle slightly. The road was not difficult yet. He could sense the unease around him and wanted to do something to ease it. He considered stopping to ask if she was okay, but then he hesitated, unsure if it would make things worse. He kept driving slowly and carefully, feeling the weight of the moment settle over the passengers. The woman shifted again, trying to find a position that hurt less. She leaned slightly to one side and then back again. Her muscles ached from holding herself stiff, and her mind raced with thoughts of what others might be thinking. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that made her chest tighten even more. She wished she could explain the pain without being judged, yet she could not find the words or the courage to speak. A man sitting nearby glanced at her and then looked away. His curiosity had been piqued, but he did not know how to react. He whispered something to the person beside him, and both of them exchanged quick glances. Their eyes flicked back toward the woman, but they did not approach or speak. Their concern was quiet and distant, but it was there the woman tried to focus on her breathing again. She imagined the sun outside warming her face and the wind brushing her hair in a soft way she pictured herself standing on an open field where the air was clear and free. She told herself to hold on just a little longer, to let the discomfort pass without showing it too much. She closed her eyes and tried to center herself in a moment that belonged only to Hertha. Apache continued along the road, and the landscape shifted to small hills and scattered trees. Shadows moved across the interior of the vehicle as the sun changed its position in the sky. The woman peeked through the window and saw a bird in the distance flying low over the grass. It reminded her of moments of freedom she had experienced in her life before responsibility and pain had grown so heavy. She let herself watch the bird for a few moments and felt a small lift in her spirit. A jolt from the road brought her back to the present, and she winced softly. Her hand gripped the bag tighter, and she leaned back in her seat. Her eyes darted briefly toward the driver, who was still focused on the road, but she could sense his awareness of her discomfort. The shared tension between them was quiet but real. It was an invisible line connecting to people who did not know how to speak about the moment. The passengers continued to observe quietly, and the silence became a space where everyone was aware of one another without words. The woman felt both the weight of attention and a strange sense of relief that someone noticed even if they did not speak. She told herself that reaching her destination would bring comfort, and she tried to focus on the thought of the road ending soon. She remembered times in her life when she had felt helpless in public situations. She had learned to keep her face calm and her voice quiet. She had learned to mask emotion and to make pain invisible to others. She had practiced this so often that it had become second nature. Yet in this moment, the sudden intensity of discomfort had broken through all her defenses and reminded her how fragile even the strongest appearances could be. The driver adjusted his speed again and kept his eyes forward. He could feel the subtle movements behind him, and his mind weighed each second carefully. He did not want to embarrass anyone, and he did not want to act in a way that might worsen the situation. He hoped that time passing slowly would be enough to let the woman regain composure without needing to stop or intervene. The woman tried to focus on simple details around her. She noticed the shape of the seats, the color of the walls, and the faint hum of the engine. She counted small objects outside through the window in her mind. As a way to distract herself from the pain, she focused on breathing in and out slowly, telling herself that this moment would pass even if it felt endless right now. Suddenly, the Apache hit a small dip in the road that made it sway slightly. The woman could not hold back a small sound of pain this time. It was brief and soft, but it carried her emotion clearly. She quickly hid her face and pressed her hands over her mouth. She felt every eye on her again, and her body stiffened. Her mind raced with embarrassment, and she wished the ground would swallow her. The driver glanced in the mirror again and felt the weight of responsibility on him. He realized that silence was both comforting and isolating, and he wished he had the right words or actions to ease the moment. He adjusted the mirrors slightly and kept a careful but gentle control of the vehicle. The woman closed her eyes again and tried to imagine herself safe somewhere familiar. She pictured a quiet room with soft light and gentle sounds. She tried to convince her body to relax, though the memory of the sudden jolt of pain still lingered. Her hands held her bag tightly, and she whispered in her mind that she would make it through the journey. The Apache moved steadily as the landscape outside began to show small buildings and the signs of approaching villages. The woman could sense the end of the journey drawing closer, and a small hope grew inside her. She reminded herself that she had survived the moment so far, and that she could continue through the remaining distance. Passengers remained quiet, watching without speaking, and the tension slowly began to ease, though it did not disappear completely. The driver continued carefully, and the vehicle moved with steady rhythm down the road. The woman allowed herself a small exhale as she felt a tiny shift in the weight on her chest. She told herself that reaching the next stop would give her a chance to rest and to gather strength for what came next. Teach, bump, and sway of the Apache reminded her that life often brought sudden challenges that could not be predicted or avoided. She realized that Though she could not control the road or the reactions of others, she could control her own breath and thoughts, even in moments of discomfort. The journey would continue, and she would continue with it, holding both pain and hope together inside. Her mind and body, the sunlight shifted once more as the vehicle moved past small hills and open fields. The woman looked outside briefly, seeing the gentle sway of grass in the breeze. She felt a quiet connection to the world beyond the vehicle and allowed herself to imagine herself stepping out safely at the end of the road. She closed her eyes again, focusing on that vision, telling herself that the journey was almost complete and she could endure the remaining moments. Apache continued to move along the winding road, and the woman tried to calm her thoughts. She pressed her hands over her bag and felt the steady vibration of the vehicle under her feet. Each moment seemed long and heavy, yet she told herself to focus on the small details around her. She watched the trees sway and the sunlight fall on patches of grass. She tried to let her mind settle on the simple movement. Outside, instead of the sharp pain that still lingered in her body, the driver noticed the slight movements behind him and kept his eyes forward. He adjusted the speed gently and tried to maintain a calm rhythm. The road ahead was clear, but the tension inside the vehicle made it feel heavier than it was. He could sense the unease and uncertainty surrounding him, and he wanted to do something to ease it without creating more discomfort. He had learned to be patient in these situations, and now patience was all he could give. The passengers remained quiet, and most kept their eyes forward or focused on the scenery outside. Some stole quick glances at the woman and then looked away. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity, concern, and uncertainty. No one spoke, but the silence was heavy with thought. The woman felt the weight of these eyes and wished she could shrink inside herself until the journey ended. She thought back to earlier moments in her life when she had felt a similar fear of being exposed. She remembered times when her body had betrayed her in front of others, when she had made small noises or gestures that revealed pain or emotion. She had learned to hide these things quickly. Yet in that moment she realized how easily control could slip away. She felt a wave of vulnerability wash over Hera. Small bump in the road caused the Apache to sway slightly, and she could not hide a soft sound that escaped from her mouth. She quickly pressed her lips together and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment, and she felt her body stiffen. The passengers around her shifted in their seats, and a quiet glance passed among them. Some looked concerned, and some unsure of what to do. Their attention was focused on her, but no one spoke. The driver slowed the vehicle slightly and adjusted his position on the seat. He could feel the tension growing, and he wished he had the right words or actions to ease the moment. He kept his hands on the wheel and tried to focus on the road, while also being aware of the woman behind him. The quiet presence of the vehicle became a space where each person felt the weight of unspoken thoughts. The woman tried to focus on her breathing again. She inhaled slowly through her nose and exhaled through her mouth, trying to calm the sudden rush of pain and embarrassment. She imagined herself standing in a quiet field where the sun was warm and the air was clear. She told herself to hold on and to let the journey continue without letting the discomfort take control. The landscape outside changed gradually from open fields to small clusters of houses and fences. The movement of the Apache seemed slower now as the driver carefully navigated the curves and bumps in the road. Each small jolt caused her body to tighten and reminded her of the fragility of control. She pressed her hands against her bag and kept her head down, imagining herself arriving safely at the next stop. A few passengers whispered softly to each other and then fell silent again. Their voices were low enough that the woman could not hear the words, but she could feel the awareness of others around her. She felt exposed and vulnerable, yet at the same time there was a small comfort in knowing she was not completely invisible. The quiet attention of others held a strange mix of judgment and concern. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror once more and saw the woman shifting slightly in her seat. He could sense the intensity of the moment and kept the vehicle moving steadily. He wondered if stopping would help or make the situation worse. He decided to let time pass while keeping a careful watch, ensuring that the journey continued smoothly. The woman recalled moments of solitude in her life where she had faced discomfort alone. She remembered how she had learned to control her body and her reactions through practice and determination. yet the suddenness of the pain. Today reminded her that some moments could not be planned or contained. She felt a small tear form in her eye and quickly blinked it away, pressing her hands tightly against her bag to regain control. Outside the window, a small bird darted between the trees. She watched it for a few moments, letting the simplicity of its movement remind her that life continued beyond the confined space of the vehicle. She focused on the rhythm of the bird in flight and tried to match her own breathing to its gentle motion. She imagined herself stepping out into open air where the discomfort would fade even if slowly. Another bump caused the Apache to sway, and she let out another soft sound. She quickly pressed her mouth again and lowered her head. Her embarrassment was heavy, and she felt her face flush. She wished she could explain herself, but words felt impossible. She realized that sometimes human pain could not be fully shared, and that the silence around her was both judgment and understanding intertwined. Passengers remained quiet, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward her. They did not know how to act yet. They felt the presence of someone in discomfort in the shared space of the vehicle. Their silence was a mix of concern, curiosity, and hesitation. It reminded the woman that even unspoken attention could feel weighty and affect the way she experienced the moment. The driver adjusted the mirror slightly and kept his hand steady on the wheel. He told himself that calmness was the best action he could take. He moved slowly along the road, keeping the vehicle steady and watching the road ahead, while also sensing the tension behind him. He hoped that reaching the next stop would give everyone a chance to breathe more freely. The woman focused on her hands gripping the bag. She felt the texture of the fabric and counted the folds and creases in her mind. She imagined herself stepping out at the end of the journey and finding a quiet place to rest. She told herself that she could endure the remaining distance and that her body and mind would recover once the journey ended. The sun shifted lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the road. The movement of the Apache seemed slower and more deliberate. Each jolt and sway reminded her of her own fragility, yet also of her resilience. She took a slow breath and allowed herself to acknowledge that she had survived the most difficult moment so far. She pressed her hands to her chest and whispered quietly in her mind that she would continue. The passengers continued their quiet observation without interfering. Their presence was noticeable, but not intrusive. They watched without judgment, and yet the attention itself carried weight. The woman felt the mixture of vulnerability and subtle comfort that came from being noticed even in a moment of weakness. She tried to focus on the movement of the trees and the distant hills to distract herself from the sharp awareness of the vehicle interior. A sharp turn in the road caused the Apache to tilt slightly. She felt another small jolt of discomfort and pressed her hands tightly against her bag. She lowered her head and focused on breathing. Counting each inhale and exhale, she reminded herself that this moment would pass, and that she had the strength to continue even though it felt heavy and unrelenting. The driver kept the Apache moving steadily along the road. He adjusted his position on the seat and focused on keeping the vehicle smooth. He realized that time and calmness were the best tools he had in this situation. He told himself to continue patiently, without drawing attention to the discomfort behind him. The woman imagined the end of the journey where she could finally release the tension and let her body rest. She pictured herself stepping onto solid ground, feeling the sun on her skin and the wind on her face. She focused on that image and allowed herself a small sense of hope that the discomfort would fade when she reached that point. Apache continued along the road with careful rhythm. The landscape showed small signs of the village approaching: houses, fences, and scattered trees. The woman kept her head down and pressed her hands on her bag. She focused on the vision of her safe arrival and allowed herself to let the rhythm of the vehicle carry her forward. Each moment was heavy, yet she held on to the thought that she could endure the remaining distance. The Apache continued down the winding road, and the woman felt a mixture of relief and tension. She pressed her hands against her bag and tried to calm the flutter in her chest. Each bump and sway reminded her that the journey was not yet over yet. She told herself to focus on the approaching village. She imagined stepping off the vehicle and finding a place to rest. She held the thought close like a small flame to keep her strength up. Driver kept his eyes on the road and hands steady on the wheel. He sensed the quiet tension behind him and hoped that time would help ease the situation, he did not speak because he did not want to worsen the moment he adjusted the mirrors and checked the road ahead. Making small corrections to keep the Apache moving smoothly, the passengers remained quiet, though some stole quick glances at the woman. Their faces were a mix of concern, curiosity, and uncertainty. None of them spoke, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words. The woman felt the weight of their attention, yet there was a strange comfort in knowing she was not invisible. Even if they did not fully understand what she had experienced, she thought back to other moments in her life when she had faced discomfort in public, remembered times when she had struggled to keep her body and voice under control and had succeeded with effort and focus, yet the sudden intensity of the pain today had broken through those defenses, reminding her how quickly human control could slip away. She pressed her hands over her chest and told herself to hold. Ona's sudden bump made the Apache sway, and she let out a soft sound. She quickly pressed her mouth and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment. She could feel the eyes of the driver and passengers on her again, yet she dared not explain. The words felt heavy, and her emotions even heavier. She told herself that surviving the moment quietly was all she could do. Driver slowed slightly, sensing the discomfort, and adjusted his driving to make the ride smoother. He focused on the road. While keeping awareness of the interior, he told himself that calmness and patience were the best responses. He did not want to interfere too much, but he wanted to make the vehicle steady and predictable for everyone. The woman focused on her breathing, inhaling slowly and exhaling just as deliberately. She counted in her mind and imagined herself somewhere quiet with open air and sunlight. She tried to let the thought of reaching the next stop carry her through the remaining distance. She held her bag close and pressed her lips together, trying to stay steady. Outside the window, the landscape began to change. Houses appeared along the roadside, and small fences marked boundaries. The road became smoother, yet each turn reminded her that she was still inside a moving vehicle, and control was not entirely hers. She felt the ache in her muscles and the sharp reminder of discomfort, and she tightened her hands on the bag to stay composed. Passengers whispered softly to one another, then fell silent again. Their voices were low and indistinct, but the awareness of them added to the sense of shared space. The woman felt a mixture of relief and exposure, knowing she was observed, but not confronted. Their attention was both heavy and subtle, reminding her that human presence could be felt even without action. The driver kept a steady pace, adjusting slightly for small curves and bumps. He realized that maintaining a gentle rhythm was the most important thing he could do. He felt the responsibility for the passengers and the situation in the vehicle, and told himself to remain calm and measured. The woman closed her eyes and recalled moments in her life when she had been alone and facing discomfort. She had learned to rely on her inner strength. Yet the sudden pain reminded her that resilience was tested in unexpected ways. She felt a small tremor in her hands and pressed them tightly against her bag. She whispered in her mind that she could continue to endure. A slight sway in the Apache caused another small sound to escape her. She pressed her hands to her mouth and felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She lowered her head and wished she could explain the intensity of the moment, yet she could not find words. The silence around her was both judgment and quiet understanding intertwined. Passengers remained still, observing without interfering. Their eyes occasionally flicked toward her and then away. Their quiet presence reminded her that even unnoticed attention could affect how she felt. She tried to focus on her own breathing and the rhythm of the road as a way to regain some control over the situation. The driver adjusted slightly in his seat, keeping the Apache moving steadily. He focused on calmness and rhythm. He told himself that maintaining control of the vehicle and ensuring safety was the best way to manage the moment. He sensed the quiet tension in the vehicle, but did not act in a way that could make the woman feel more exposed. The woman imagined herself reaching the end of the journey where she could rest and find comfort. She pictured a quiet place with sunlight and gentle air. She tried to hold on to this vision, letting it guide her through each sway and bump of the vehicle. She focused on counting her breath and letting the imagined comfort outweigh the discomfort she felt inside. The landscape outside showed more signs of human activity. Small shops and people moving about reminded her that she was nearing a populated area. The Apache slowed slightly on uneven pavement, and she felt a small jolt, yet pressed herself against The seat keeping quiet, she reminded herself that each moment brought her closer to the end of the journey. The passengers continued to observe quietly. Their presence was felt, but not intrusive. Their awareness was subtle, yet noticeable, and the woman felt the combination of vulnerability and small comfort in their silent observation. She tried to focus on the details around her to distract from the lingering discomfort inside. The driver kept a steady focus on the road. He adjusted speed and direction, gently making the ride as smooth as possible. He reminded himself that the best action was patience and calmness. He felt responsibility for all inside the vehicle and knew that quiet attention and measured driving were the best ways to handle the situation. The woman pressed her hands against her bag and allowed herself to visualize stepping off the Apache into open air. Feeling the sun on her face and the wind brushing past her, she imagined a small sense of release from the tension she carried. She focused on each breath, telling herself that she could make it to that point and find calm. A sharp turn caused another slight sway in the vehicle, and she let out a small soft sound. She quickly pressed her mouth and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment. She tried to regain control, focusing on breathing and counting slowly. She reminded herself that reaching the stop was the most important thing she could do. At that moment, the driver navigated the final curves with care, keeping a steady pace. The Apache moved closer to the village, and the landscape showed more activity. People walking and small vehicles moving about marked the approaching stop. He kept attention on the road, yet remained aware of the interior, knowing that each moment inside carried its own weight and tension. The woman imagined the end of the journey again, where she could rest. She pictured the small shops and familiar faces she might encounter. She held the vision close to her heart, letting it guide her through the last part of the ride. Each sway and bump was a reminder of the fragility of control, yet also a test of her ability to endure. The passengers remained quiet, their subtle presence a reminder of shared human experience. Even though words were absent, their awareness was felt and carried weight. The woman focused on her hands gripping the bag, in each slow breath she reminded herself that she could continue and that the journey would soon end, bringing relief and a chance to recover. The Apache moved closer to the village, and the woman felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension. She pressed her hands on her bag and tried to steady her breathing. Each sway of the vehicle reminded her that control was not fully hers yet. She told herself that soon she would step off and find calm. She imagined a quiet spot where the sun warmed her face and the air was gentle and clear. The driver guided the Apache carefully along the narrow streets. He kept a steady pace, adjusting for bumps and curves. He sensed the quiet tension behind him and hoped that time and motion would allow the situation to ease. He did not speak because he did not want to draw attention or worsen the moment. His focus was on calmness and steady rhythm. Passengers continued to watch quietly. Some exchanged subtle glances, but no one spoke. Their eyes occasionally flicked toward the woman, and then the way their presence was felt without intrusion, and it reminded the woman that even silent awareness carried weight. She pressed her hands against her bag and focused on her breathing, imagining herself reaching the end of the journey. A small jolt made the Apache sway, and she let out another soft sound. She quickly pressed her hands to her mouth and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment. She wished she could explain the sudden sharpness of pain, yet the words felt impossible. She told herself that endurance was the only option left, and that the moment would pass if she could hold on. The driver slowed slightly, navigating uneven pavement. He kept his eyes on the road and hands steady on the wheel. He reminded himself that calmness and patience were the best actions he could take. He adjusted mirrors and speed gently, ensuring the vehicle moved smoothly and steadily toward the stop. The woman closed her eyes and focused on slow inhalations and exhalations. She imagined herself standing in open air, feeling the sun and wind on her face. She counted each breath and told herself that each moment inside the Apache brought her closer to relief. She pressed her hands on her bag to hold her body steady and let her mind find small moments of calm. Landscape outside showed more signs of life. Small shops and moving people marked the approaching stop. The road became smoother, and each curve reminded her that the journey was nearing its end. She felt a small sense of hope and tried to let it carry her through the remaining distance. She reminded herself that each sway was temporary and that she would soon find safety, and passengers whispered softly to one another, then fell silent again. Their presence was felt quietly and reminded the woman that even unspoken attention could shape. The moment she tried to focus on her own breathing and the rhythm of the road as a way to regain control. She told herself that she could endure the remaining moments and that relief was within reach. The driver adjusted slightly in his seat, keeping the Apache steady. He focused on calmness and rhythm, adjusting gently for small bumps and curves. He told himself that patience and careful driving were the best ways to manage the moment. He sensed the quiet tension and hoped the steady motion of the vehicle would allow the woman to regain composure. The woman pressed her hands against her bag and imagined stepping off the Apache into open air. Feeling the sun on her face and the gentle wind on her skin, she pictured a place to rest and let her body recover. She focused on each breath and held the vision close, allowing it to guide her through each sway and bump of the vehicle. Small jolt caused another soft sound to escape her. She quickly pressed her hands to her mouth and lowered her head. Her face burned with embarrassment. She tried to regain control by focusing on breathing and counting slowly. She told herself that the stop was near and that endurance was within her reach. The passengers remained quiet. Their subtle presence reminded her of shared human experience. Even without words, their awareness was felt. She focused on her hands, gripping the bag in each slow breath. She reminded herself that she could continue and that the journey would soon end, bringing relief and a chance to rest. The driver navigated the final curves, carefully keeping the Apache steady. He adjusted speed gently, ensuring smooth motion. He felt responsibility for everyone inside and told himself that calmness and measured driving were the best responses to the tension in the vehicle. He hoped the quiet rhythm would help ease discomfort. The woman imagined the end of the journey again, where she could rest and find comfort. She pictured herself stepping onto solid ground, feeling the sun and gentle air. She told herself to hold on to this vision, letting it guide her through the last part of the ride. Each sway and bump was a reminder of the fragility of control, yet also a test of endurance. The landscape showed more movement. Small shops and people walking along the roads marked the approaching stop. The Apache slowed slightly and the woman felt a small jolt, yet she pressed herself against the seat, keeping quiet. She reminded herself that each moment brought her closer. Two relief passengers observed quietly. Their presence was subtle and reminded her that even unnoticed attention could affect how she felt. She tried to focus on her own breathing and the details outside the window. She told herself that she could endure the remaining moments and that the end of the journey would bring release. The driver kept a steady focus on the road. He adjusted speed and direction gently, making the ride as smooth as possible. He reminded himself that calmness and patience were the best tools. He felt the responsibility for everyone inside and knew that careful, measured driving would help ease the tension. The woman pressed her hands against her bag and allowed herself to visualize stepping off the Apache into open air. Feeling the sun and gentle wind, she imagined a small sense of release from the tension. She focused on each breath and told herself that she could make it to the stop and find calm and comfort. The Apache slowed near the final stop and she felt a small jolt. She pressed her hands against her chest and told herself that the journey was almost over. She prepared to step off and find a quiet place to rest. She focused on her vision of sunlight and gentle air, letting it carry her through the last moments. The driver brought the Apache to a complete stop and turned slightly to signal passengers. The woman took a deep breath and slowly lifted her head. She felt a small relief knowing she had endured the journey. She prepared to step off the vehicle and into a space where she could finally release the tension she had carried. As she stepped onto solid ground, the sun warmed her face and the gentle wind brushed past. She felt a deep exhale escape her chest, and the small burden she had carried began to lift. She looked around at the village and the people moving quietly through their day. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief, yet also a small sense of triumph for having endured the journey. Passengers began to move and step off the vehicle. Their quiet presence and patience had shaped the moment into one that allowed her to maintain dignity. She pressed her hands lightly on her bag and took small steps forward, feeling the solid ground. Beneath her feet, each step reminded her that control could be regained and that endurance had its reward. The driver adjusted the Apache to park carefully. He watched the passengers step off one by one, including the woman he felt a quiet sense of responsibility and relief that the journey had ended smoothly, and that the tension had been managed without conflict. Woman walked toward a small open space, feeling the sunlight and gentle air. She took slow, deliberate breaths, letting her body and mind recover from the journey. The quiet around her and the rhythm of movement in the village helped her feel connected, yet free. She pressed her hands lightly against her chest, feeling both relief and strength. She realized that even moments of pain and discomfort could be endured, and that human awareness, even when silent, could shape the experience. She told herself that the journey had tested her, yet also reminded her of her resilience. She allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Knowing that each experience had its own lesson and meaning, the sun continued to warm her face, and the gentle wind brushed her hair. She pressed her hands lightly against her bag and walked slowly through the village, feeling steady and calm. The tension from the Apache faded with each step, and she felt a renewed sense of presence in the world around her. She told herself that endurance had its reward, and that moments of discomfort could be transformed into lessons of strength and awareness. After stepping off the Apache, the woman felt the warmth of the sun on her face and the gentle sway of the wind brushing past. She took a deep breath and felt the tension in her chest loosen slightly. Each step she took along the village street reminded her that the journey was behind her, and that she could now focus on regaining calm and composure. She held her bag lightly against her side, letting herself feel safe and present in the world around her. The driver of the Apache watched the passengers disembark, including the woman. He felt a quiet sense of relief, knowing that the journey had ended without incident. He adjusted the vehicle and prepared for the next route, keeping in mind the delicate balance of attention and patience needed in such moments. His focus on calm driving had helped manage the tension, and he felt a quiet satisfaction that it had worked. The woman walked slowly through the village, feeling the small changes in her body as tension eased. She noticed the gentle movements of people around her and the soft sounds of daily life. The air smelled faintly of earth and cooking fires, and she allowed herself to absorb the quiet comfort of the environment. She reminded herself that each moment of discomfort had passed and that endurance had brought reliefs. She continued forward. She thought about the sudden pain and the reactions of others. Inside the Apache, she realized that embarrassment and discomfort were natural human experiences. Yet the way the driver and passengers had remained patient and silent had given her space to regain control. She felt gratitude for their quiet awareness, even if they had not spoken her. Steps took her toward a small open area in the village where sunlight fell evenly across the ground. She paused and felt the warmth spread through her body. She pressed her hands lightly to her chest and let herself breathe fully. She allowed a moment to acknowledge both the pain she had endured and the relief she now felt. The experience had been difficult, yet it had reminded her of her own resilience. The driver began preparing the Apache for the next set of passengers. He made small adjustments to ensure comfort and safety. He thought about how each journey was different and how attention and patience could transform moments of potential tension into manageable experiences. He reminded himself to remain calm and measured in all situations, and to be aware of the human experiences carried quietly inside the vehicle. The woman continued to move through the village, feeling the gentle rhythm of her steps. She focused on her breathing and the sensations in her body. She felt muscles that had been tense slowly relax, and a calmness spread from her chest to her limbs. She reminded herself that even sudden discomfort could be endured, and that patience and quiet awareness were powerful tools for managing human moments. She paused to observe a small group of people nearby moving quietly through their tasks. Their presence was calm and non-intrusive, and she felt a subtle reassurance in watching their actions. She realized that the village itself provided a rhythm of life that allowed for reflection and ease. She pressed her hands against her bag lightly and took a slow breath, letting her body adjust to the calmness. The driver adjusted the mirrors and checked the Apache. As he prepared for the next journey, He reflected on the events of the morning and the importance of patience and careful attention. He reminded himself that calmness and understanding could transform moments of human discomfort, and that silence, when used with awareness, could provide comfort as well as respect. The woman walked further into the village, noticing small details that had gone unnoticed before she saw the play of sunlight on building walls, the gentle sway of leaves in the wind, and the movement of people quietly going about their day. She allowed herself to appreciate these small observations as a way to stay present and to regain a sense of normalcy after the tension of the journey. She remembered how the sudden pain had caught her off guard and how difficult it had been to maintain control. She realized that human moments were often unpredictable, yet could be navigated with patience and awareness. She pressed her hands lightly on her bag and focused on each breath, allowing herself to recover fully from the journey. Small breeze moved across the village, and she felt it on her face and arms. She allowed herself to turn slowly and take in the surroundings. She felt the warmth of the sun and the gentle movements of air as comforting reminders that the journey had ended, and that she could now regain stability and calmness in her body and mind. The driver prepared the Apache for new passengers, thinking about the delicate balance of attention needed to manage human experiences. He reflected on the morning and how quiet awareness and patience had helped manage tension. He knew that future journeys would require similar care, and that understanding human moments was as important as the mechanics of driving. The woman found a small bench in the open area and sat down, letting her bag rest at her side. She took slow, deliberate breaths and allowed her body to relax. She felt the tension that had gripped her fade with each exhale. She reminded herself that she had endured the sudden pain and embarrassment, and that she now had a space to process and recover fully. Around her, the village moved at its gentle rhythm. The sound of distant footsteps and soft conversations created a calm environment. She allowed herself to absorb the quiet energy and felt a sense of connection to the simple rhythms of life. She pressed her hands lightly against her chest, feeling both relief and a renewed sense of strength. The driver started the Apache and moved slowly along the road, adjusting speed for comfort. He reflected on the balance of awareness, patience, and calm that had allowed the previous passengers to complete their journey without incident. He reminded himself to continue practicing careful observation and gentle guidance in all situations. The woman remained on the bench, feeling the warmth of the sun and the gentle sway of the air. She imagined her steps forward into the day and the quiet sense of calm she could carry with her. She pressed her hands lightly against her chest and allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the relief from the journey and the strength that had been built through endurance. Small children ran past, playing quietly, and a few people moved along the paths. She observed their gentle motions and allowed the calm energy to fill her awareness. She realized that life continued around her and that she was part of the rhythm. She pressed her hands lightly on her bag and took deliberate breaths, letting her body and mind adjust fully to the quiet. The driver watched the Apache from a distance as it moved slowly toward the next stop. He reflected on how each journey carried its own human experiences, and that attention and patience could help transform moments of tension into manageable experiences. He reminded himself to always remain calm and aware of subtle human needs. The woman stood and stretched lightly, feeling the comfort of her body and the warmth of the sun. She pressed her hands lightly on her bag and took slow breaths, letting the tension fully leave her. She realized that she had regained calm and composure, and that the journey had reminded her of her resilience, patience, and capacity to endure sudden discomfort. She walked slowly through the village streets, noticing details she had missed before. The sound of small movements, the warmth of the sun, and the gentle breeze reminded her of the simple comforts available around her. She pressed her hands lightly to her chest and let each step guide her toward a renewed sense of presence and calm. The driver parked the Apache carefully and reflected on the importance of patience and awareness. He thought about how the quiet attention of passengers and drivers alike could transform moments of human discomfort. He reminded himself that calm and measured actions were the best tools for managing subtle human experiences.